Dex woke up to the sound of someone crying. It was a sound he had become accustomed to listening for, and he lifted his head to find the source. The little kids in the gang were always waking up crying. They had dreams about the stepdad with amorous fingers, the uncle who liked to hit, the mother who left bruises, and they came awake yelling and crying. Only Dex could soothe them back to sleep, it seemed. Wizard wasn't as good with the little kids. Wizard wasn't as... Dex grimaced as he rubbed his head, remembering his own bad dream. Wizard had smiled at him before falling over dead in the street. It had been a dream. No way that some greaseball had killed the Wiz on his own turf. It had all been a dream, just nerves over the job today. It was all the more believable now that he was hearing some little kid crying in the night, looking for a mommy who wasn't there. He could almost believe it if it wasn't for waking up in an unknown sterile hell where he found himself. The room was like a bunk room, some kind of mental ward summer camp. There were 15 beds, all lined up neatly in a row, and all but one of them was occupied. Beside the empty one was a girl who looked like she couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. She was so small that Dex wondered how she had got into this program at all. The second he thought it, he wondered why he had thought it. Was this a program? If so, how had he gotten in for that matter? "Mama? Mama?" the little girl was yelling, looking for her mother as if she expected her to just appear. Dex was going to her before he could think better of it. She turned slowly as he loomed over her. She was getting that look that privileged kids got when they see someone as large and black as Dex must seem to her, and he tried to soften his face so he didn't scare her any worse than she already was. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Are you okay?" "No," said the little girl. "I'm afraid. I fell asleep on the plane, and now I'm here, and I don't even know where here is." Dex nodded, mentally reassigning this from summer camp to snatch job hideout. Suddenly and unthinkably, the little girl pressed her wet face against his stomach and wrapped her arms around him. It caught Dex by surprise because it was not the sort of thing that happened very often to him. He'd been hugged before. Social workers did it often enough to try to get your trust, but it wasn't often that someone just came up and hugged you out of the blue like that. Most of the kids in his gang were too broken for physical contact to come easily, and Dex had counted himself amongst them. He found that he didn't mind being hugged, though, and he patted her back as he tried to get her to calm down. "Not to break up your little moment," said a snide voice from the left, "but if you could keep it down, that would be great." Dex turned to find a girl with ash blonde hair looking at him from beneath a plastic hospital pillow. What he could see of her face would have been considered attractive, he supposed, and she had that waifish look that some of the older girls on the street had. She seemed too young for it, but Dex had seen younger girls trying to cultivate it. When you were underage and hungry without a home to go to, sometimes you ended up doing some things you weren't proud of the next day. This girl, however, looked like she wouldn't know much about that kind of life. "Sorry," Dex said as he continued to pat the smaller girl. "Know where we are?" The blonde girl rolled her eyes. "Well, duh. It's the School for the Gifted at Ohio State. You must be lost. I didn't know they had a special ed program." Dex started to give her something back, something a little less genial, but the little girl took her face away from his stomach long enough to blubber out that she was wrong. "We're in the California Research Institute for the Gifted. Don't you know anything?" The blonde girl was sitting up now, and Dex could tell that she was around the same age that he was. She was dressed in a light pair of pajamas, something you might get in a hospital sleep study, and she was smiling. It never touched her eyes, though, and they were arctic. Wherever she was from, it was pretty clear that she didn't suffer being spoken to like that by girls as small as this. I don't know what line of horseshit they fed you, princess, but they told my father that they were taking me to Ohio State. Daddy would have never agreed for anyone to take me out of state, not in a million years. You don't know anything, and your daddy is a... But the little girl put a hand over her mouth before burying her face against Dex's stomach again. Dex lifted an eyebrow, wondering what she had been about to say, and turning back to the blonde who was staring daggers at the kid. She's just scared. Don't take it personal. The older girl flipped her hair in a dismissive way, as if it was nothing to her. Dex had gotten pretty good at reading people, though, and realized he'd have to keep an eye on the little girl, at least if he meant for her to be safe here. My name's Dex, and I'm still not quite sure where we are. I never did get a rundown from anyone before they picked me up. Or had he? You aren't the one we want, kid, but you'll do. Had that been from the dream? Dex was starting to wonder if it had been a dream at all. Yeah, I don't remember asking, said the haughty girl with the blonde hair. She flopped over on her side, turning away from them as she pretended to go back to sleep, but Dex wasn't fooled. He had seen better acting on the soap operas at the group homes. He turned back to the little girl, the one who seemed to have adopted him in that way that little kids do sometimes, and quietly guided her back to his bed. She might have to fight the blonde with the cold eyes at some point, but it wouldn't be today. Dex asked her if she'd like to sit on the bed with him, and she nodded against his stomach. She was wearing the same pajamas the girl had been wearing, and that was the first time he realized that he was too. All the kids seemed to be in the same sterile white tunic with crisp edges and straight white pants with a blue line down the leg. He wondered who had dressed him. He also wondered where his clothes were, though it was something he realized might be less important. The girl pulled her face away from his stomach, and he tried not to wince as a runner of snot came along with her. "Thank you," she said soupily through a nose full of muck. "I think that girl would have liked to hurt me after you left." Dex lifted her onto his bed and found that she weighed less than he'd thought. She must be even younger than he had suspected. I'd thought that might be what she was thinking. When you live on the streets as long as I did, you get a pretty good feel for what people want and what they mean to do. The little girl smiled and wiped her nose. She had a good smile, and it broke through her sadness like a sunrise. "I'm Masha," she said, without being prompted. "Masha, that's a nice name. I'm Dex." She nodded. "Short for Dexter, but nobody calls you that." Dex nodded before he could think better of it, not stopping to ask how she could have known such a thing. They sat and talked in that semi-dark bunk room for what felt like no time at all. Masha told Dex about her home and her family, telling him about the things she could do as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Dex mostly listened, telling her things about the street towards the end when she had run into things to talk about. He told her about the little kids in his gang that he took care of, about Smoke and the interesting thing that he could do. He started to talk about Wizard, but it made his throat tight to talk about the boy. Dex didn't understand why, probably something to do with the dream he had had, but he stopped suddenly midway through as the tears came to make an appearance as they welled up in his eyes. "What about you, Dexter?" Dex laughed as he wiped his eyes. "Call me Dex, little sister. No one calls me Dexter, not since I stopped going to the social service building." "Okay," she said, with a watery smile. "What do you do, Dex?" Dex tapped the side of his head and winked. "I call it the brain blast. I don't actually know what it does, but it seems to reset people sometimes, or just push them over other times. It's like a blast of energy, and when it hits people, they leave me alone." "You're a telekinetic," she said with sudden excitement. Dex furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. "What's that?" "Someone who can move things with their mind." He laughed again and couldn't remember a time that he had laughed quite this much. "I guess so. My friends and I always used to read the X-Men comics, and Wizard said what I had was like Charles Xavier when he would move things with his mind. He said mine was more like a gun than a hand, though. He would..." But Dex stopped talking again as his eyes got wet for no reason. He wiped at them, not sure why he was doing it, and when he looked down at Masha, he found that she was crying too. They killed your friend, didn't they? Dex opened his mouth to deny it, but he couldn't. How could you know that? I wasn't even sure I knew it. I'm still not sure I know it. Masha looked around, trying to see if anyone was listening. She leaned in close, having to stand up so she could whisper in his ear, and Dex leaned closer too. Can you keep a secret? Dex nodded before he could think better of it. If this was a place like he thought it was, secrets could be very dangerous. Sometimes, when I really concentrate, I can hear people's thoughts. She whispered it, like she was afraid it was some dark secret, and when she sat back down, she looked at Dex as if pleading with him not to tell anyone. He mimed locking his mouth up and throwing away the key, and that made her giggle. Dex found that he liked this little girl, despite himself. He had always taken care of the little kids in his gang, out of a sense of obligation. He was bigger and they were littler. That meant that they needed him, but it wasn't like that with Masha. When he talked with Masha, it was like talking with Wizard. It just seemed natural. "Hey," came a voice from behind them, and as Dex turned to look at the speaker, he found himself putting a protective arm around Masha. He turned to find a skinny white kid in the same no-color pajamas, a kid who looked like he might know a thing or two about living rough. "Oh, didn't want any trouble," he said, putting on a dopey smile as he put his hands up. "I'm Dunstan. I'm just wondering if either of you know where we are." Dex relaxed a little. This one clearly wasn't another one like the blonde girl. "I'm Dex. This is Masha." "No, neither of us know where we are either." Dunstan nodded, coming around the bed to stand before them. Dex saw that he was trying to be approachable, the way people did when they wanted to be friends or just to get close so they could get in the first lick. But something seemed off about him too. Dex couldn't put his finger on it, but the longer he watched him, the closer he got to it. Dunstan kept his hands behind his head, fingers in his hair as if protecting them. The kid was probably a germaphobe, Dex thought, and made note not to pat him if they ended up being tight. "Great," Dunstan said, drawing it out. "I knew I should have taken up that last family on their offer for cohabitation. Might have saved me from the organ farm." Dex furrowed his brow, wanting to tell him not to say things like that, or he might scare the kid, but when he looked down at Masha, she was unfazed. Quite the contrary, she was spellbound. "What's your superpower, Dunstan?" she suddenly asked, leaning forward. Dunstan looked a little shocked, but he hid it well. "Who says I have?" "'Cause we all do," Dex said, grinning as he rolled his eyes. "Kinda seems like why we might all be here." Dunstan let out a breath, and it sounded distinctively horse-like. "Always gets me in trouble." Some of the other kids were starting to stir now, and Dex saw that many of them were in equally sorry states. They were confused, scared, angry, and not really sure what to make of their newfound situation. Little conversations were beginning to pop up, many with varying volumes, and Dex noticed that Dunstan was sticking close to them. Gangs were already forming, unlikely allies binding together, and it seemed that he meant to stay near them lest he be forced to make a similar introduction again. Dex found that he didn't really mind. There came a sudden loud whistling from the front of the room, and they all looked up to see a large, bald man with a jack-o'-lantern smile standing in the doorway. By the way Masha tensed, she must have recognized him. "Rise and shine, snot babbies. Welcome to kindergarten. I assume you all have lots of questions and concerns, but I'm not here to answer those. I'm here to get you to the caf so you can eat some slop and hopefully sit still while I try to explain this little situation to you. So, line up and follow me. Don't break off on your own, and don't get lost. There are bigger monsters than me in these halls, and you wouldn't want to get gobbled up." "I doubt it," Masha whispered as the kids started moving agreeably towards the man. Dex got up too, taking her hand, but she stayed put. "Come on, little sis. I'll protect you from the big scary man." "Me too," Dunstan said, offering her a hand which Dex was surprised to find that she took. Dunstan grimaced a little as he touched her, but he hit it well, and Dex thought his superpower might have something to do with physical contact. Masha must have picked up on some of that too, but when she tried to let go, he covered her hand with his slightly tanner one. "Don't worry, kid. Your memories are like milquetoast next to what I've seen." The three proceeded to the line, taking up the rear, and went to their first day of kindergarten in a little cluster of soft, worried voices. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Heather for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah Samar 42 for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, we always tell you to come on down to Patreon or check out my member section on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton contributors get their video 12 hours earlier at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. And Ghostly Readers get a book every time I write one on their doorstep. There's actually one coming up here in a few weeks, so if you'd like to get in on that, please go ahead and sign up. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.